I feel like this was such another great weekend for us to talk about, a knockout of a weekend for the industry and for Creed 3. So this is going to be, I think, a short but sweet episode leading into a great interview that we had. Why don't you tell our listeners about the interview?
Well, over the years, I've had the great pleasure to work with producer Paul Brooks, who is the mastermind behind such films as the My Big Fat Greek Wedding series, the Pitch Perfect series, Haunting in Connecticut, just had Pray for the Devil, and he's got a great movie coming up this week, Champions. And Paul was kind enough to sit down with you and I and kind of talk a little bit about how these scripts come together. And Paul Brooks is an astute observer of the box office. He is one of these guys who I hear from over the weekend probably 10 or 15 times as he's analyzing the numbers and looking at them. He's a box office nerd like us. You know, we could talk box office all day long, but he's also just a super, super guy. And I'm really excited for our listeners to get a taste of who Paul is and what he brings to the table. And really hearing him talk about Champions is great later on.
And isn't Champions based on a Spanish film, Campeones?
Yes, and Paul tells the story about how the script came to him and how it all got put together and how Woody Harrelson became part of the project. So it's a really cool story, and that's something we have to look forward to in just a few minutes for everybody. But Paul and I figured would be a very good time to talk about what a great weekend at the box office it was.
It really was, Mike. And just for our listeners, Mike is at a pool hall in some undisclosed location. So if you're hearing that, that's what it is. We're operating in real time here on Ticket to Ride. So,
well, and I took a Ticket to Ride this week, traveling on business this week, meeting with some of our exhibitor friends on a couple of projects that we're working on, and it's been a lot of fun. All that being said, thought this was a good opportunity. And Paul, I think when we talk about Creed 3, it is another example of just another movie this year that overperformed all of the pre-release expectations. Going into the weekend, you know, everybody had it 40, maybe if this thing overperformed, it would do 45. I woke up on Friday. I think I texted you pretty early. I said, wow, looking at these numbers, after they did the 5.45 million on Thursday, it's like going to be north of 50. It didn't look back from there.
I was kind of shocked because, again, the pre-release expectations were like 40, 45 million. And when it did 22 million on Friday alone, we're like, wow, this movie is really doing well, and it wound up with $58.4 million domestically and just over $100 million globally for Michael B. Jordan, his directorial debut. What a great result. And interestingly, Mike, there was a bit of box office archaeology I had to go through because I got the question, how many times has an actor been in the top two films at the same time on the same weekend? And it's a very, very rare occurrence. And for Jonathan Majors to be in Creed 3, a top-line character, not talking about supporting characters or extras or anything like that, but it's very rare indeed. And so I put on my box office thinking cap and got out my pick and shovel. I went looking through the Comscore data, and I realized, though, just from when it happened, that when Titanic was in the marketplace in 97 into 98.
Oh, you're going back.
I'm going way back. So you had Titanic open in mid-December of 97, and in March of 98, DiCaprio had another movie called The Man in the Iron Mask that had opened. And so he had the number 1 and 2 films in the marketplace. So Titanic had opened on December 19 of 97. By the time March 13 of 98 came around, guess what? Titanic was still number 1. So DiCaprio had the number 1 and 2 films the weekend of March 13, 98. Quite amazing, although they were only a few $1,000s apart, Titanic, The Man in the Iron Mask. So for DiCaprio, that was a big one. And then I found another one, Mike. If you can guess this wasn't even on the radar. This happened over the weekend of January 18, 2013. Mama, starring Jessica Chastain, was the number 1 movie. And the number 2 movie was Zero Dark 30, both starring Jessica Chastain. So I don't want to go into this too. I could spend a whole episode on this. But Mike, it's so rare that there's no real like traditional search term to determine this bit of trivia. But it's a big deal for Jonathan Majors, who was also in Devotion recently. What a great career. We're just hearing about this gentleman, and to have those top 2 movies this past weekend was a big deal.
Well, and I think we should also look at our friends over at Crunchyroll. They've done it again. This time, Demon Slayer. I'm not about to try to pronounce the entire title of this movie, but it's the next Demon Slayer movie. This one goes and does, what was it,
$10.1 million this weekend, the number 4 spot to debut there, just behind Cocaine Bear and Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Of course, Creed 3 leading the weekend. But you're right. And then Jesus Revolution right there, rounding out the top 5 in our box office derby.
Well, we had 4 movies this weekend that went over $10 million at box office. And Paul, you summed it up perfectly prior to the weekend that March was already shaping up to be a monster. And before we kick it over to Paul Brooks, John Wick 4 tickets went on sale last week. And every exhibitor I talked to said, this movie is huge.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into what some of the pre-release predictions might be, but need it be said, Wick is going to be one of the top openings of the year. Don't be surprised if it doesn't rival Ant-Man over the 3-day for top honors movie to date.
Pretty amazing. And I think one of the cool things too, Creed 3, best opening of the Creed franchise. Scream 6, could it do it? Shazam? John Wick 4? If we start having 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th installments that are providing the biggest box offices of those franchises, and I'm not saying that's necessarily going to happen, but there's going to be some big numbers coming out of March, and we've never had a March over $1 billion in domestic box office overall. That happened back in 2017. Beauty and the Beast opened to almost $175 million in March, Mike, of 2017. Logan opened to $88.2 million. This is going to be a March to remember. It already is, and off to a great start. And I think with Champions opening in March, on March 10 to be exact, that's going to continue the tradition of great movies drawing big audiences to theaters.
Well, and I think that is a very good segue. Why don't you and I move over to the theater now? Let's go walk into the auditorium and sit down and talk with our good friend Paul Brooks.
Paul Brooks, take it away. Enjoy the interview. Roll the projector. Paul and I were talking about you already, and
Hey,
in glowing terms. And
what I want to do is, first of all, welcome to Ticket to Ride a very good friend of mine and a very prolific producer, Mr. Paul Brooks. If you don't know it, Paul is the man behind some of the most iconic film franchises that are out there right now. Paul, I looked it up. Do you know how much box office your films have accumulated over the course of your career?
I can honestly tell you the 2 things that I have never looked at, or I would say I haven't looked at in over 20 years, reviews and box office.
Paul and I talk box office all the time. Mr. Brooks and I do.
we have to bring this up.
Well, Paul and I'll get to the box office in a second. Not only is he just a prolific producer, he's also a very astute observer of the business. And on the weekends, I will get texts at all hours from Paul wondering about how the grosses are going. What are we doing? Wow, that's great. That's overperforming. But Paul, you are so in tune with that, Mr. Brooks. It's something that most producers I have not run into that with.
I'm sort of data obsessed because, like all of us producers in an increasingly complicated world, I overanalyze tracking, which is madness. Then I overanalyze how it opens at 9 o'clock in the morning. Then I drive Mike mad and all my other friends mad. It's like, Christ, can we just turn off the phones? Well, we can't. We like the guy enough to at least leave. Well, let's turn them off at Saturday, 9 o'clock. Okay. After he buzzes us and asks what the hell the 9 o'clocks look like, then let's turn them off. So I tend to be a compulsive obsessive. That is,
we love that, by the way. Mike and I are very obsessed with box office, but we're also left brain, right brain, as I'm sure you are.
Right.
It's the analytical, but it's also the love and passion for movies. And
Totally.
As a producer, obviously you're wearing 2 different hats in a sense. Like, you got to be on top of scheduling and casting and on the ground machinations, but also you have to just have that love for the movie making side, but also the numbers. And it is a business, right? It's show business. And Mike, you still haven't told Paul what his box office.
No, I was about to say that
was.
right out. So, Paul, your films have totaled almost $1 billion of domestic box office. That's an incredible number.
Wow, good Lord. And that's with everything I let slip through my fingers over the last 20 years, which I hope we're not going to get into.
No, I really want, Paul's got a movie that's opening this week, Champions with Woody Harrelson, which looks fantastic. I know it's tested great. It's been screening through the roof, and I want to talk about that in a second. But what I do want to say and let everybody know is Paul was the man behind My Big Fat Greek Wedding. That franchise was his. And somebody might say, that's great. That is my life's achievement. I have this iconic franchise. But no, Paul had to go and do it again with Pitch Perfect. I think it's just amazing that you have two distinct franchises, Paul, with all the other films that you've produced as well.
Well, I mean, that's very kind. As I say, we're not going to talk about the ones that got off the hook. But I mean, truthfully, well, firstly, and I'm not being disingenuous or falsely modest, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And I was part of a moment in time with a bunch of very talented people with fundamentally, in both instances, Greek Wedding and Pitch Perfect, just brilliant scripts. But the scripts were so good. They were just so, so good. And, occasionally you come across something where you think, Christ, is this really as good as I think it is? And you realize it is, and you just jump in. So
what's interesting though, both of those movies in my mind have a very similar theme, and that was My Big Fat Greek Wedding and the original Pitch Perfect. Both films, the studio wasn't quite sure what to do with them.
There's some legendary stories kicking around. I mean, yeah, Greek Wedding was a really interesting one because, well, the short version is that we screened it for all the studios, and this was a movie that tested, if I recall, 98% top two boxes, and the def recs were like 96%. These numbers are just insane. And we had people cheering in the theater. And I understand this, by the way, and we live in a tricky business, but studio after studio we just don't know how to market it. And my take was, well, look, clearly there's something special here. So let's figure out how to market it, which is why ultimately we actually took it over and we put up the P&A Gold Circle because we were so convinced about the movie, and the rest became history. So I was happily so naive then that I didn't consider the consequences if it didn't work. And also, to be fair, I thought, yeah, this movie, we can do 30 million domestic. I didn't think we'd be adding 200 onto it.
It's amazing to me, Paul, is in watching this movie, the universality of what happens within the framework of that film. And by the way, no secret, I'm Armenian. So I've been to a lot of big fat Armenian weddings, and I totally relate, including my own. And it really spoke to everyone. What's interesting, when I look at our Comscore data, looking at the trajectory of the movie, and this was a slow rollout, man. It was fantastic. Yeah. It just built over time. And I think that blowing out movies in 3,000-4,000 theaters, especially one like this, that was sort of a new idea, a new thing. It wasn't a superhero movie or a part of known IP. You look at the numbers, and it really didn't go into over 1,000 theaters until week 18.
Yeah, I say we had a very strategic strategy. Frankly, the strategy was a function of how much we were willing to risk. I think we opened in 150 screens, but we were spending I think 1.6 million a week on average, which was still a fair commitment to have a crack. And I think by the time we got into the 6th week, we were 9 million deep. And it was only then we started seeing some separation. But it was fascinating because even the opening week, the screen average wasn't great, but word of mouth had already started moving. And then I really just felt second or third week in, we had a word of mouth train here. You know what word of mouth trains are? When they really start moving, they really start moving. And we had similar with Pitch Perfect, and I'm preying on Champions at the risk of being crass, that we just had the Regal Monday mystery screenings, and, crazy people raving about the film. I love doing feel-good movies / feel-great movies. And I'm hoping that in today's world, we can catch a little bit of a word-of-mouth train with Champions, just partly because I'm a gambler. I love seeing that I might be right. And also, I just love seeing people come out of a theater and have a good time.
I think you're betting on the right horse, because feel-good movies, that's what people want right now. Now, that can change over time. There are times when people want more challenging movies. If it's sort of like, award season, there may be movies that are more challenging and all that. But I think right now, we've seen this in the numbers, that people are really looking for that fun, feel-good experience, the communal experience of the movie theater.
I want to ask you a question, Paul. How did Champions come to be? How did you end up with that project?
Look, I've had a over 20-year first look with Universal. I have a second with Lionsgate, and the great thing about being in a relationship like that is people will sort of tip you the wink on some movies. It was Alex Yoss, who was working for Universal in London, I want to say 3 years ago, said, you should go and watch Campeones, the Spanish movie. It's in the LA Spanish Film Festival in May or like next month or whatever it was, because he said, I think it's crazy that nobody's picked this up for a remake. And I went and saw it and I thought, this is crazy that nobody's picked this up for a remake. Because the movie was massive in Spain. It did like 25 million euros in Spain or something, which is, guys, is, in Spain, if you do 3 million, that's a big number. And the movie was just so funny and so full of heart. And you come out of the theater just feeling great. And I thought, I've got to have a go at this. That was how it came about. And then the short version from there was that Jeremy Plager, who looked after Woody Harrelson while he was at CAA, and we're doing a bunch together now that he's producing, said, Woody would be great for this. I'm going to send him the Spanish film to have a look at. And he looked at it with his wife, and his wife, Laura, turned to him and said, you're doing that movie. And he tells it great. And he said, I turned to her and said, I'm doing this movie. Then Jeremy said to me, he said, well, when do you want to read the script? I said, I don't need to read the script. I'm doing this movie. He brought Bobby Farrelly in. I've been, like all of us, a fan of the Farrelly brothers for forever. 90s comedy, iconic. What they did in film, in comedy, just truly ahead of the curve. Yeah, and so and it all just came together beautifully. And Focus came on board, and Uni International, very early, and have been such passionate believers from day one. And I got to say, one of the things that, sorry, I may ramble a bit here, so just jump in.
No, this is fantastic. Are you kidding?
We're here for you.
I didn't have a television in my house until I was 30, but my dad was a lover of movies, of American movies in that period of the late 60s through the 70s. And where we had double bills, so you could go and see like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and, Red Sun. And so I grew up loving movies, and I've never lost that passion for movies. I went and saw A Man Called Otto the other day and just loved it. And I just loved, watching the trailers and sitting down, and my wife and I just loved the movie, got beautifully choked up at the places where we were going to, and just came out and this is what it's all about. This is why, and Mike, you and I have talked about this, and with David and others, it's why even with my Pollyanna specs on, we believe that people are coming back to the theaters outside the tentpoles, and clearly it's happening. If you look at the last 6 weeks,
yes,
it's happening, and adults are coming back, and people are coming back, because it's such, particularly in America, it's such a massive cultural experience. It's part of our cultural lives here.
You mentioned A Man Called Otto, and I went and saw that as well, and that was an old-fashioned, just heartwarming adult drama comedy kind of film that you left going, that was great. I really enjoyed that. And then this weekend, when you look at something like, as we talked about it, Cocaine Bear and Jesus Revolution, that go out and just crock them. And
love it.
They are two distinct audiences too.
Totally.
And, as we talked about, Paul, you and Derek Beatty and I, before I know Paul D, those two movies were interesting, Mr. Brooks, in that they wore what they were on the sleeve.
Absolutely.
Cocaine Bear was Cocaine Bear. Jesus Revolution was Jesus
and
Revolution.
Champions falls into that. I think right now that's really working. And the fact that, look, people love superhero movies. I love them too. And the known IP and the sequels and the franchises. But it seems that perhaps because of, maybe I can lay this at the doorstep of streaming, that people are open to all different types of content, even if it's something brand new. And that's a good thing. And I think it'll play very well for Champions. And March is going to be a gangbuster month. I mean, Mike and I talked about this on our last episode that, rising tide does raise all ships. The more people who are in theaters, the more they're being exposed to in-theater marketing and trailers. They're getting excited for upcoming movies. So I think that this release date is just fantastic. March is a killer month, I got to say, especially this year.
Yeah, Focus, I think, have dated it really well, and beyond that, they've just been so brilliant to work with. As I say, I'm very grateful for over 20 years at Universal. And for me, with all the cynicism of the town, I've been fortunate enough to work with a bunch of great people. I really have. There's enough nice people in this game.
You're right. And Focus features, Lisa Bonnell over there, she is a filmmaker-centric executive and passionate film fan. So that helps a lot, I think.
The whole team is. The whole team, of course, is so, down from Cujo right down. I'm just across the board. They love movies. What I love is this combination of professionalism and passion. I just love that. It's what we all try to do, because all of us in this game, I think those of us who are smart enough to realize how lucky we are to be doing it. It's cool.
It beats working for a living.
It really does.
I just want to reiterate, we're talking to Paul Brooks, renowned producer, has a movie Champions coming up this weekend on March 10. I really think this is going to be another great example of an original film with great stars, great director, and just a comedy that I think will be uplifting for people and fun to go see in the movie theater.
What we do know is that people love this movie. So if we get them in, I think we've got a real shot. It's always in the lap of the film gods. We all know that. But we know that people really dig this movie. Yeah, I just feel, touch wood, we've got a shot. And all I ever want is a shot. And if we can open okay and then just keep, I'd love to think we could just keep plodding on and plodding on, because I think people are going to recommend this movie. I just think they're going to be surprised by it.
Can you tell us what the movie's about for those who, those few people who may not know?
Well, let's just say it's based on Campeones, the Spanish movie. And it's about a failed NBA coach who gets fired under a DUI. And when he gets in front of the court, the judge says, well, you have to go and do 3 months community service coaching a group of folk with intellectual disabilities. He freaks out. And then, of course, all the fun and games starts. But it's really a very human story, because they learn from him. He learns more from them. It's full of heart and it's full of humor. It has, I think, a really quietly affecting love story at the heart of it, which is something I wanted to work in more than the original movie. I adore the original movie, by the way. So it was very exciting for me at the premiere that the director and producer of the original movie were very happy with our movie.
Oh, is that right? That's really, there's no better validation than that, right?
Yeah, no, it was really sweet of them, because their movie is incredible. I think we made a really good fist of ours, and I think Bobby did a great job, and Woody's incredible in it. And for me, I got to say, it was one of probably my most memorable film experience, because working with the friends, the folk in the team, and the way Woody worked with them and Bobby worked with them, it was just humbling, but incredibly exciting. And by the way, at the end of the day, I just think and hope it's just an incredibly accessible, fun movie.
Well, look, it looks fantastic. I can't wait to see it, Paul. You and I have been talking about it for, it feels like the last year or so. I know that you've been high on it from day one, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time today. I know you got to head out. You're heading for a plane right now, so appreciate the time.
Chaps, thank you for letting me waffle, and congrats, Paul, on that incredible backdrop.
Thank you so much. I've won awards for it. And thank
Mikey,
you, Paul. I love people named Paul. My dad was Paul. I'm Paul. You're Paul. It's great. And what an honor. I've just met you today. I've known of you for years. What an honor to have you on our Ticket to Ride podcast for Comscore with Mike Polydorus and I, Paul Garabedian, getting to interview you. It was so cool. Thank you.
Too kind, chaps. Thanks so much.